President Trump wants to make the penny extinct.
And we are now a step closer to making that happen. The U.S. Mint said Thursday it has made its final order of the materials used to make pennies, meaning it will stop putting new pennies into circulation by early next year. After that, it will be time to start saying a nickel for your thoughts, or just use your card to pay.
We're moving to a cashless society. People use credit cards and debit cards and so on. So the penny is actually not being used as much.
But by 2026, there likely won't be enough pennies to use in cash transactions, so businesses will need to start rounding up, which will raise prices for consumers.
Prices will now be rounded up to the nearest dollar, which means that most customers will end up paying 1 penny more than they were before.
The move is the culmination of a long bipartisan effort to do away with the lowest denomination of American currency. The penny, worth 1 cent, costs nearly 4 cents to produce, but it still has its fans who say they'd like to see it stick around.
I know that it costs more to make a penny than it's actually worth, but we're big fans of the penny. Keep the penny.
Welcome. I am Dena, and you are listening to another discussion with Dena. Well, say goodbye to the penny. The U.S. Mint in Philadelphia is said to have pressed its last circulating penny. This is after President Trump earlier this year directed the Treasury Department to stop minting new 1-cent coins, citing the rising cost of production. Now, the U.S. Mint said in its annual report that each penny costs 3.69 cents to make. Trump argued that pennies cost more to mint than they are worth, including also was a January 2025 recommendation from Elon Musk, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to put an end to the penny because producing 4.5 billion pennies in fiscal year 2023 cost taxpayers more than $179 million. Now, the first pennies in which the U.S. minted began after its establishment in 1792. It originally featured an image of a woman which represented liberty. But in honor of President Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday, he became the first president to be featured on U.S. coins. There are still some very valuable and rare pennies that are in circulation today, so don't get rid of your pennies right away. For example, the 1943 copper Lincoln wheat pennies. A few were produced accidentally when the U.S. mints were supposed to use zinc to save copper for the World War II effort. Now, depending on the condition of the 1943 Lincoln wheat penny that you have that is still in circulation, it would likely be worth between $100,000 and $250,000. That's according to Feigenbaum, who is the executive director of the Professional Numismatists Guild, PNG, a nonprofit organization composed of many of the nation's rare coin experts. Now, even though the U.S. Mint has stopped making pennies, they won't just disappear instantly, because there are said to be about 250 billion pennies that are still in circulation. Again, that is according to the American Banking Association, and we know that many of us have pennies stored in piggy banks, change drawers, or just sitting around in containers somewhere. It is believed that the typical household has $60 to $90 in extra coins, or what they call neglected coins at home. That's according to the federal government, of course. But there is still the question of, is this reasonable, or is this a manufactured reason for getting rid of these coins? Is it to invoke a cashless society? It's a valid point. I personally never accepted this so-called coin shortage that you hear and see a lot of times when you're shopping, I just don't accept it. There are still tons of pennies out here, although circulation is set to be slow because nearly 2/3 of the about 165 Federal Reserve coin terminal facilities which circulate coins are no longer taking or distributing pennies. And this is according to Bill Mara, who is the dean of the School of Social Sciences at the University of California, Irvine, and director of UCI's Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion. He further stated that pennies will remain legal tender, but why wouldn't they? Many of the coin terminals today are closed to pennies, and the circulation of pennies is slowing down. This is something I believe that is manufactured. It's done on purpose. I don't believe there is an actual penny shortage. In fact, in our business, when we needed coins, we would go to the bank. We'd have to pay to get change instead of accepting currency for coins. Have to actually pay to get pennies and coins, and I think that's ridiculous. But this is said to likely accelerate the decline of penny usage. And there is an expectation that more and more businesses will move to a cashless model in the next 10 years, while strongly encouraging card usage in the meantime. This will negate the need for businesses to round transactions to the nearest nickel, is what they're saying. But it still leaves the question again, was this done on purpose? Was there an agenda here all along? Just food for thought. There have been several reports of stores conveniently running short of pennies. I've witnessed this myself. And these places like to round the cash transactions up, and some even round it down, because I have been just given a full dollar sometime when there's pennies involved. But this is when customers do not have the exact amount of tender. I see it as more of a manufactured crisis, as I've said. Why doesn't it just round down in favor of the consumer instead of giving businesses additional pennies that can add up to millions of extra dollars just for free? Especially when it involves these large corporations with multi-businesses all around the country. Because think about how many places that you frequent, that there are tons of them in your city alone. Just imagine them getting 100,000 customers in just one day and giving a business the extra 4 cents instead of that penny. You rounding up to the nickel. You're rounding up 7 days a week, 100,000 people, 52 weeks in a year. That's a pretty hefty overage or profit. That could earn approximately $1.5 million a week just from rounding up. And that's with like 100,000 customers. Of course, there's often more. That's just something to think about. Now, you can take your coins to exchange them in kiosks. We know that if you want to get rid of your pennies, retailers have told congressional leaders and people who make the laws that there needs to be information or laws, because at least 10 states and some localities have laws that prohibit rounding transactions to the nearest nickel. Some businesses are asking that cash-paying customers voluntarily round up for donations to avoid needing pennies at all to make change and stay compliant with state and local laws, while other places are rounding down. It's not a lot of them that are rounding down, but they should. Thousands of retailers and stores across the United States cannot get pennies, according to them. And this is supposed to be leaving businesses to try to sort out the complicated issues that have arisen as the coins have been scarce for them to get. And this is according to Austin Jensen, Senior Executive Vice President for Government Affairs. He went on to say that Congress understands the magnitude of the problem and that they are optimistic that the government and the lawmakers will move to take up this issue and provide businesses with the needed clarity. Now, going beyond just an individual cash transaction, retailers need to assess how the currency changes could affect their point of sale systems as well as their sales calculation. How is it collected? How is it reported? And this was noted in a June 2025 brief from accounting, tax, and consulting firm PwC. Now, the lack of enforceable federal or state rules on rounding and transaction processing, it creates compliance risk. And that is particularly true for multi-state operations, as I've said, because inconsistent practices could increase the sales tax audit exposure risk. Now, there will still be tons of pennies out here, and they are. But the circulation is said to eventually slow down because nearly 2/3 of the about 165 Federal Reserve coin terminal facilities which circulate coins are no longer taking or even distributing the pennies. And this is according once again to Bill Maher, the Dean of School of Social Sciences at the University of California, Irvine, and director of UCI's Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion. As those coin terminals close to pennies, again, the circulation of pennies will slow down. Pennies will remain legal tender, however, this would negate the need for businesses to round transactions to the nearest nickel. Now, I know for a fact some stores like Kroger and Dollar General, they're already rounding up. And I have personally visited these places. I've witnessed them round the cash transactions up to the nearest 5 cents when customers don't have the exact amount of change. But speaking of nickels, some suggest that the nickel coins day also may be numbered because each nickel is said to cost more than 13 cents to produce, and that is according to the U.S. Mint. But there's a reason it may not happen as soon as we think it should, because the cost to consumers of rounding transactions to the nearest nickel is estimated to be around $6 million. The cost to round to the nearest dime is closer to $56 million. And that is according to one official's estimate. Therefore, the cost-benefit analysis for taxpayers is not nearly as clear for nickels as it is for pennies. But Trump wasn't the first to suggest getting rid of the penny. U.S. Representatives Jim Colby of Arizona and James Hayes of Louisiana, they had co-sponsored the Price Rounding Act of 1989, which would have done away with the penny, and it would have required prices to be rounded to the nearest 5 cents. But these bills were never passed. Also, the Currency Optimization, Innovation, and National Savings, which is COINS Act in 2017 that was proposed by Senator John McCain and Mike Enzi. This legislation proposed not minting pennies for at least 10 years. And after that time, the Government Accountability Office would then study whether or not to resume minting them or maintain the suspension of them. Now, I say keep the penny, even if it is necessary to change how it is minted or what metal it uses, but keep the penny around. It saves a lot of headache. But let me know what you think about this elimination of the penny. Do you agree it is a good idea to get rid of the penny, or do you believe it is an attempt to create a cashless society? Are they rounding up or down in your neck of the woods? Let me know. Like, share, and subscribe, and leave me your comments on this topic. I want to thank you for listening and joining me today, and I invite you to join me next time for another discussion with Dena. Ta-ta!
This concludes your daily discussions with Dena. Join us Monday through Friday at 12:30 p.m. Like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment.